The fighting nerds are taking over MMA. Carlos Prates absolutely delivered in his very first UFC main event. Not only does he face the first ranked opponent of his career, Neil Magny, the all-time leader in wins in the welterweight division, someone who is a perennial contender, a perennial gatekeeper, been in the octagon with the who's who of the 170-pound weight class. And not only does he get the victory, he finishes Neil Magny in the very first round with one punch. All 4 victories in the UFC for Carlos Prates have come by way of knockout and all been walk-off KOs. And can we touch back on the fighting nerds point real quick, because there's not a ton to break down here in terms of the 4 minutes and 50 seconds of action we got to see at UFC Vegas 100 in the main event. The fighting nerds between Carlos Prates, Gene Silva, and Caio Borralho combine for this record. If you take into account Dana White's Contender Series, where Carlos Prates, Gene Silva, and Caio Borralho all earned contracts to get into the UFC, Carlos is 5-0 in the promotion. Gene Silva is 4-0 in the promotion. Caio Borralho is 9-0 in the promotion. Carlos Prates will now be in the top 15 of the welterweight division. 4 victories in the UFC, all 4 via knockout, 2 of them in the first round. Gene Silva, 3-0, in the UFC. All 3 of them are by way of knockout. Caio Borralho is on an unbeaten roll, coming off of one of the best fights in 2024 in a victory over Gerald that placed him in the top 5 of the 185-pound weight class. And Carlos Prates said it best during the post-fight show on ESPN+. They asked him, what is it with the fighting nerds? What is it with your camp that makes such a difference here and that is providing the results that you all are putting on in the octagon? He said, I'm not really sure. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure any of us fighters know what that magic recipe is, that secret formula, but it is the coaches and the training partners and the sparring partners in that gym. All of them come together. They rally behind one another. They even recruited John Jones, Khalil Roundtree, and Aljamain Sterling to join the fighting nerds. At just 31 years old, it's clear that Carlos Prates is right now entering his prime. He has won 10 fights in a row, and 9 of them are by way of knockout. 9 of them in a row, as a matter of fact, are by way of stoppage. He's 21-6 overall, with 19 of those 21 coming by way of finish. Been stopped in 5 of his 6 fights. I said it on Friday. I'm saying it again here on Monday. He is a kill or be killed fighter, but he really is a very strategic, technical fighter that looks for his openings, and when he finds them, he will land one shot, and that is quite literally all it took. If you look at the finishing sequence that he had with Neil Magny, it was one shot that just barely grazed the temple, and it put Neil Magny out cold, face first on the canvas. The fighting nerds are absolutely the gem of the year for the UFC, the team of the year for the UFC, the talent that is coming out of this gym. You even look down outside of the undefeated records of these 3 in the UFC. You look at someone like Bruno Brazil, who yes is 2-2 in the promotion, but is coming off of a huge win over Molly McCann and has fought a very good plethora of competition through those first 4 fights. She's just now kind of entering her all. I feel that she can still be a legitimate player. Then I'm sure there's plenty of other fighters like Mauricio Rufy, who's fighting this coming weekend at UFC 309 in Madison Square Garden, that don't quite get the shine that these 3 do. But Prates, Gene Silva, and Caio Borralho are carrying it. They are being the talking points, the focus of this gym, but behind them is a whole team of warriors that I think we're going to hear a lot from for many years. And Carlos Prates had a perfect call out in the aftermath here. He took his shot at 2 different fighters, one that is a little bit far-fetched and one that is super reasonable. The one that is far-fetched is top 5 ranked Jack Della Maddalena to fight him in Australia in February. Carlos looking to make a quick turnaround, said he has a daughter that lives in Australia, so he has fun going there to visit her and get the job done on the side. Now, will that happen, him being in the octagon in February? I think that still can, but will it happen against Jack Della Maddalena? That is where I have some pause. I do believe that Jack is still recovering from an injury. Carlos even said on that post-fight show, with Kamaru Usman sitting right next to him, the UFC has interest in doing Kamaru Usman versus Jack Della Maddalena. Kamaru said, that's news to me. Then Carlos says he may even fight Shavkat Rakhmonov. Kamaru Usman says, That's news to me too. So I don't know what exactly is going on at the top of the welterweight division. We know Belal Muhammad fell out of his title fight at UFC 310 in December. Shavkat is left without an opponent. Kamaru Usman is there without an opponent currently. Jack Della Maddalena recovering from an injury. Carlos is just now going to enter come Tuesday morning the top 15, probably between somewhere 13, 14, or 15. A big victory like this over Neil Magny, I could see him going higher than just that number 15 spot. But if you look ahead of him, Jeff Neal is ranked number 10. Jeff Neal is coming off of a victory over Rafael dos Anjos where he took hardly any damage. I think you could easily pair Jeff Neal versus Carlos Prates to happen in February in Australia, and that would be an absolute banger of a fight. Jeff Neal has never been in a boring fight. Carlos Prates doesn't know the definition of what boring is when you see him go inside the cage. Two guys that have legitimate knockout power. One guy that is the prospect, the up-and-comer, that is very dangerous. Jeff Neal is just on the outside of that prospect term surrounding his career at this point. He is a veteran of Dana White's Contender Series, been fighting the who's who for quite a long time, but hasn't quite reach that full potential that I do feel that he possesses. So it's a big opportunity for Prates to crack the top 10 and for Jeff Neal to kind of put that RDA victory behind him. Yes, it is huge, but there was, of course, that little gray area of the injury that happened to RDA in that fight, which will leave people from giving Jeff Neal the full credit that he deserves for that victory and the damage that he was dealing prior to that finish here against Carlos Prates. I think that's what you do. Of course, it would be great to have it on a big pay-per-view card as a nice featured bout, but I also wouldn't mind that fight going 5 rounds on a main event headliner. But then again, those two more than likely won't see 25 minutes anyway, so why not just put them on a pay-per-view card? So let me know in the comments below, what did you think of this performance from Carlos Prates from start to finish? Yes, you saw the knockout power on display, the finishing prowess, the slow, plodding, methodical skill set that Carlos Prates possesses with his Muay Thai and his striking, but he also fended off takedowns. He was able to get off of the fence, get out of the clinch that Neil Magny was throwing at him. I thought it was a very, very good performance for 4 minutes and 50 seconds. Yes, we haven't seen him tested in deep waters, and with his fight style, I don't think that's ever going to really have to be in question regardless of how high he may climb. So what did you think of the performance, and do you want to see him face Jeff Neal next? Let me know. And now let's get into the rest of the UFC Vegas 100 card, and we will transition directly into the co-main event where we saw the former two-weight world champion in one championship come over, make his UFC debut, and get a submission finish in the third round against the all-time leader in finishes and submissions in the UFC middleweight division, Gerald Meerschaert. That, of course, is RDR. Reinier de Ridder makes good on his debut. Now, it wasn't flawless. It wasn't perfect by any means. He looked good in round number 1, even had a knockdown on the feet against GM3, which going into the fight, you kind of would have felt that maybe Gerald would have the upper hand in the striking realm, just given how good RDR is in the grappling exchanges. Gerald has shown some skill sets on the feet in the past, but it didn't matter here in this one. The power advantage and the striking was in favor of Reinier de Ridder outside of a couple decent shots that GM3 landed. Round number 2 got a little bit sloppy. Gerald Meerschaert, I felt, even won that round, so I had it 1-1 going into round 3. And again, in round 3, it was a lot of grappling and transitioning in the stand-up to get to the ground, and once on the ground, on the mat. We knew that that's what we were going to get, though, all in all, when this fight happened. But it didn't even reach the 2-minute mark of that third round before RDR locked in an arm triangle choke that forced Gerald Meerschaert to tap. It seemed as though Gerald was running low on gas going into that third and final round. RDR didn't look exactly perfect in terms of his gas tank, but definitely had a lot more to give, and that is how he was able to pull off this submission victory. He's 18-2, 16 of those victories are by way of stoppage, and 12 of those are by way of submission. Been knocked out in both of his losses. I mean, this guy is a very, very fun addition to the UFC middleweight division, and at only 34 years old, right in that prime years, maybe just a tad bit on the edge of the prime years, but a perfect time for him to enter this middleweight division that is red hot right now. And I think after a win like this, albeit it was sloppy at times, I think given his pedigree outside of the cage, you put him in with a top 15 opponent next, next in this middleweight division, and the perfect matchup is the number 12 ranked Jack Hermansson. Jack is coming off of a victory back in February over Joe Pyfer, where he had a very convincing decision victory. Haven't seen him since here. Won't see him in 2024, it looks like. So in 2025, hopefully the first quarter, RDR, Jack Hermansson. Jack is a very good grappler in his own right, but also very well-rounded, polished. Not great in any one particular area, but good everywhere. Where Reinier de Ridder, you know where he wants this fight to go. I think that's a perfect matchup. I have to mention this fight in the women's strawweight division because Gillian Robertson is now 4-1 since moving down to 115 pounds. The only loss is to top 15 ranked strawweight Tabitha Ricci in a fight that went the full 15 and had moments for Gillian in that bout. She's 15-8 overall, not the prettiest of records, but again, as I said Friday, been in there with the who's who in the flyweight division. The all-time leader in finishes and submissions in that women's flyweight division is Gillian Robertson, and she has transitioned perfectly into the strawweight 115-pound weight class. I mean, look at this. Finishes over Poliana Vieira and Pierre Rodriguez. A dominant decision victory back in June over Michelle Waterson-Gomez. And here, this one wasn't perfect by any means against Luana Pinheiro. She definitely could not compete as well as she wanted to on the feet. That is what had her struggle to get this fight to the ground a little bit more difficult than it would in other fights, but she did get the job done, and especially round number 3 was a borderline 10-8 before Luana switched positions a little bit in the later half of that round. Gillian had almost 3 minutes of full mount control, tried to throw elbows, 12-6 elbows. She even threw a 12-6 elbow into the butthole. So yeah, it wasn't perfect by any means, but I really like watching Gillian Robertson go out every single time. At 29 years old, she's just now about to enter her prime. With Dean Thomas in her corner, they have a very strong chemistry together. If she can just continue to polish up her striking and how she can approach getting her opponents on the ground, not many people can compete with Gillian once it is on the mat. She was number 14 going into this fight and beat the number 13 ranked Luana Pinheiro. And side rant as I pull up the rankings for Gillian's next matchup, Luana has now lost 3 fights in a row. Now, for what it's worth, when she got knocked out by Amanda Hebos, she was winning that fight until the finishing sequence in the 3rd round. In her second to most recent bout, she got finished by Angela Hill, someone who is an absolute dog and fought the who's who of the strawweight division for nearly a decade. Of course, that is amazing, but someone not known for their finishing prowess, especially not for their submissions, and Angela Hill did submit Luana Pinheiro here, and now a decision loss to Gillian Robertson. The Contender Series alum may be on the chopping block, but I think she still does have some potential here, just has to polish things up in 2025. But for Gillian, if we want to look at the back half of this division, I think a very fun fight would be either a grappler wrestler in Lupi Godinez at number 11 or a Muay Thai practitioner and number 9 ranked Marina Rodriguez. Either of those two women should be the next fight for Gillian Robertson. Both of them present completely opposite challenges, but both are challenges that I feel Gillian needs to face in order to continue climbing the strawweight rankings. And throughout the remainder of the card, there's not as much to talk about in terms of what is next, what is at stake in their upcoming bouts, the rankings, but there were a plethora of finishes throughout the remainder of the main card and prelims. We will go to Mansur Abdul-Malik, who finished Dusko Todorovic 2 minutes and 44 seconds into the first round of their fight. We knew this fight was going to be violent. It was just a matter of how short it would go. It was 2 minutes and 44 seconds, as previously alluded to. The 27-year-old Mansur is 7-0 with 7 finishes, and 6 of those are by way of knockout. He's a Dana White Contender Series alumni of this most recent season, Season 8. He just fought in August here and makes good on his UFC debut. Lots of momentum for the middleweight heading into 2025. Chuck Buffalo, Charlie Radtke. This one I didn't see coming. Matthew Semelsberger has always been in wars in the UFC. I feel like every fight he goes the distance, every fight he gets hurt, and every fight I feel like he almost wins, if not does win. But here, it didn't even make it the full 60 seconds. It went 51 seconds before Charles Radtke got the knockout finish over Semelsberger. His only hiccup in the UFC is 2. The main eventer, Carlos Prates. Outside of that, wins over Gilbert Urbina and Mike Mathia, otherwise known as Blood Diamond. He is 3-1 in the UFC. He's a former Cage Fury fighting champion and fighter, 34 years old, so a little bit later in his career to only have 4 UFC fights. However, an exciting guy, 7 finishes, in his prime, the back half of the prime, can still make noise at welterweight. Lots of welterweight action, huh? Another first-round finish, this time in the bantamweight division, where Blackshear finished the seasoned veteran that is Cody Stamann, and he did it with a rear naked choke 4 minutes and 19 seconds in, coming off of 2 back-to-back losses, one of them via knockout in just 18 seconds to Montel Jackson. A big win here for the 30-year-old Blackshear. He's been fighting in the UFC since 2022. Very, very active here. If I want to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fights in the UFC since August of 2022, staying active, fought very good competition. I mean, if you look at his losses, Farid Basharat, undefeated, Mario Bautista on a 7-fight win streak, most recently Jose Aldo, and you have Montel Jackson, who is on the come up, and again, 18-second knockout. The dude has power in his hands. Wins over Jose Johnson and Luan Lacerda, so the wins definitely don't stack up to the losses, but here, a finish over the veteran that is Cody Stamann. This was a big get-right moment for Blackshear. Tresean Gore comes back from an injury, his first fight since 2022, and gets a 1 minute and 23-second submission finish over Antonio Trocoli. First fight since October 29th, to be exact, of 2022, when we saw Tresean Gore submit Josh Frimm. So back-to-back victories, back-to-back submissions for the Ultimate Fighter veteran who started his UFC career 0-2, lost to Brian Battle, lost to Cody Brundage via knockout. Only 5-2 overall with 7 total fights, but 30 years old, was known for his knockout power in the Ultimate Fighter house, but now coming off of back-to-back subs, 3 of his 5 victories are by way of submission. Big win for Tresean Gore. Bounce back after the inactivity. Get rid of your opponent very quickly. Maybe bounce back soon. Maybe even at the end of this year. Probably not. There's only a month left of the schedule. I got a little carried away. But the beginning of 2025 looks promising for Gore. And last but not least, the first fight of the night, of victory for the women's bantamweight Melissa Mullins, who is now 7-1. 4 of her victories are by way of stoppage. 2-1 in the UFC. She's coming off of a TKO finish in her most recent fight, a TKO finish loss, I should say, to Nora Cornwall. That was back in April, so bounces back from that loss, gets a finish in her own right, does it in the second round, 1 minute and 20 seconds in. Still a little ways away from a big name or a ranked opponent, but good for her. The women's bantamweight division isn't the deepest, and it is not the most stacked. Another win or two, she can make noise in the 135-pound rankings. So let me know in the comments below your biggest takeaways from UFC Vegas 100, the monumental fight night, the fight night of all fight nights for the UFC's history in the Apex. That's it for the rest of 2024 for the Apex facility. I believe they're even doing some renovations there throughout the remainder of the year. So we'll see if come 2025, the events there start to dwindle a little bit lower, maybe only 1 or 2 a month instead of potentially 2 or 3 a month. That does make a big difference. Maybe some more travel time for the UFC and for fans like us to go see them in attendance. So give me your thoughts on the Apex, your favorite moment from all 100 cards, and your thoughts on this weekend's card. If you enjoyed this recap, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, as we continue to inch closer and closer to 1,000, just a little over 300 subscribers away now. And with this growth, 2025 looks to be the year that we will not only get that number, but hopefully surpass that number. And as all thanks to you all, I appreciate any and all support. You can also join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok. And you can follow on your favorite audio listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where podcast episodes release every Monday and Friday. Have a great week, and I will see you in the next video.